999. 999. The Imperial Palace, sometime in M41. Every day, between 1,000 and 4,000 human psykers are marched into the dark beneath the Sanctum Imperialis, wired into the oldest machine in the galaxy, and burned to nothing in a single day to power one man's continued existence. That is the official story. 10,000 years of human sacrifice to keep the master of mankind alive on a golden chair. But read it again. A living God does not need 10,000 years of life support. A living God does not need 1,000 souls a day. 1,000 souls a day is not what you spend to keep someone alive. It is what you spend to keep something from getting out. The Emperor on the Golden Throne has not spoken a coherent word since the Siege of Terra. Fulgrim, who should know, has said the thing on the throne is already gone.
So here is the question the Imperium has built 10,000 years of religion to stop you from asking.
What if the throne was never life support at all? What if the Emperor is already dead, and the throne is the only thing keeping him that way? We're not re-arguing whether the Emperor sits on that chair. The records are not in dispute on that point. We're asking what the chair is actually for. And the moment you ask that question honestly, the official answer starts to come apart in your hands. Start with the doctrine, because the doctrine is precise. The canonical account is not vague. After Horus broke him at the Siege of Terra, the Emperor's ruined body was carried into the heart of the Imperial Palace and interred upon the Golden Throne. The Mechanicum and Rogel Dorn rebuilt the machine into a life support engine.
From that chair, the Emperor projects the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon, reaching tens of thousands of light-years across the galaxy, that Imperial navigators triangulate against to plot a course through the warp. Without it, the Imperium goes blind. Ships drift. Worlds starve in silence. The light has to stay lit, and the light is him. Now the number. The Astronomicon is not free. It is paid for in people. The standard figure, repeated across the codexes since the earliest editions, is 1,000 psykers a day, specially selected, called the Chosen, fed into the machine and consumed before the next dawn. That is the baseline, and the baseline does not hold. By the close of M36, the tech priests servicing the throne were already demanding more. By the time you reach M41, the era this story lives in, the appetite has multiplied, by some accounts as much as 4 times the old toll. 1,000 on a quiet day, far more on a bad one. The Imperium tithes roughly 1,000,000 psykers a year through the black ships just to keep the furnace fed. And consider what that toll actually does to the people inside it, because the figure is easy to say and hard to picture. The Chosen are not switched off like lamps. According to the lore of the choir, a psyker wired into that machine first feels something almost like euphoria, a flood of power as the throne draws them open. Then the decline. The hair falls out. The skin goes translucent and papery. The body wastes down to nothing over days, sometimes weeks, until there is no more to take and the next one is brought forward. 1,000,000 of them a year are tithed from across the galaxy on the black ships, hauled from their homeworlds precisely so they can be spent here, in the dark under the palace, on this. That is the running cost of one chair. Not a wound dressed once and healed. A furnace fed forever. Hold those two facts next to each other. A life support machine and an energy budget like that. Because here is the thing nobody says out loud. Life support is a maintenance cost. A man in a coma costs you a bed, a drip, a machine that breathes for him. It is a small, steady expense, and it stays small. What it does not do is escalate. It does not get hungrier every century,
It does not demand 4 times the fuel in M41 that it demanded in M36. A thing that needs ever more power to do the same job is not being maintained. It is being contained. And containment is the one cost in the universe that always grows, because whatever you are holding down never stops pushing back. The Codex calls this life support. The Codex declines to explain why a man on life support consumes the population of a planet and asks for more every year. And the escalation is documented, not invented.
The lore is specific about it. By the late 36th millennium, as the warp rifts widened and the Eye of Terror churned, the tech priests who serviced the throne were already reporting that the old toll no longer sufficed. The appetite grew. Sources put the M41 demand at a multiple of what it once was. The brief's range of 1,000 to 4,000 a day is not exaggeration. It is the spread between the quiet baseline and the worst the records admit. Think about what an escalating fuel curve means for any machine. A device whose draw climbs over time is a device losing the fight it was built for. It is falling behind whatever it was meant to hold. You do not see that curve on a life support rig keeping a stable patient. You see it on a dam that is cracking, on a seal that is failing, on a containment that is slowly, expensively losing. So let's define our terms, because this whole argument turns on a single word: dead. What does dead even mean for a being like the Emperor of mankind?
Because he was never a man in the way you and I are men. Before he was emperor, he was, in the oldest lore, the sum of a circle of shamans who poured their souls into a single vessel so that humanity would have a guardian in the warp. He was a psychic entity wearing a body. The body was the smaller half. And when something like that ends, it does not end the way a soldier ends. There is no flat line. There is no still chest and a closed file. For a being whose true existence is in the immaterium, death is not a stopping. It is a leak, a spreading, a dissolving outward into the warp until the shape of the person is gone and only current remains. This is the distinction the whole question lives or dies on, and the Imperium has every reason to keep it blurred. There is biologically dead, the heart stopped, the body cold, the man no longer there.
And there is psychically present, a pattern, a signature, a current in the warp that still holds a shape. For an ordinary person, these two things arrive together and you never have to separate them. For the Emperor, they can come apart. The body can be a corpse on a chair, while a psychic remnant still hangs in the immaterium, still pulls at the astronomicon, still answers a tarot card. And if you can keep those two ideas welded together in the public mind, if you can let people assume that because the signature is present, the man must be alive, then you never have to explain the corpse at all. The theory we are testing is simply this, that the first thing happened a long time ago, and the machine exists to manage the second. And this is exactly what the oldest canon describes happening to him. The Star Child.
Introduced in the Realm of Chaos books, carried forward through the rule books, and reactivated in the most recent Siege of Terra novels. The account is that as the Emperor's spirit drifts through the warp, much of its energy has already dissolved into the flow. What remains is described as a tiny core, a fragment that stayed whole. We are told that in his final hour, he cast off his own compassion, his hope, his mercy, his love, hurling them away as weakness. That cast-off piece became the Star Child. Read that plainly. Canon is telling you the Emperor's soul is not intact. It is broken, scattered, partly dissolved, with one stubborn core refusing to come apart. That does not sound like a living God watching over us. That sounds like the aftermath of a death that is still in progress. And it reframes the whole machine.
Because if the soul is already coming apart in the warp, dissolving, scattering, with one core holding on, then what does a chair that costs 1,000 lives a day actually do for it? You cannot feed energy into a thing and call it healing if the thing only ever gets thinner. You can, however, feed energy into a thing to slow its dissolution, to hold the scattering in check, to keep the last whole core from drifting off into the current and being gone for good. That is not a hospital function. That is a holding function. And canon in The Star Child has been quietly telling us for 40 years that the Emperor's soul is not a patient recovering. It is a structure failing, slowly, expensively, with the entire Imperium leaning on the brake. Here is where the canon gives the theory its sharpest line.
In The Talon of Horus, Aaron Dembski-Bowden's novel, 2014, the story is narrated from the far side of the war by a sorcerer of the Thousand Suns named Kaon, who has no reason to flatter the Imperium. And the way that book frames the throne is unmistakable. The enthronement is described as the enthronement of a corpse upon a soul engine. The traders do not speak of the Emperor as a sleeping god who might wake and smite them. They speak of him as already finished. Fulgrim, a Primarch, a demon prince, a being who can perceive the warp directly in a way no mortal can, treats the thing on the throne as gone. Not weakened, gone. And the unsettling part is that the people best equipped to see the truth, the warp creatures who look at souls the way you look at faces, are the ones least convinced anyone is home. But here's where it gets stranger, and I won't pretend otherwise, because the canon does not let this be simple. The single most important book for this whole question is The Master of Mankind, and the brief I was handed credits that novel to Dan Abnett. The record corrects one detail there. The Master of Mankind was written by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, published by Black Library in 2016, the 41st book of the Horus Heresy series. I named the author correctly because this audience corrects mistakes, and because the book is too important to get wrong. And what that book shows is not a corpse, it shows a mind. In The Master of Mankind, we see the Emperor through the eyes of a custodian named Ra Endymion, chosen to witness scenes of his master's life and the secret war being waged beneath the palace, the war for the human webway, the great project Magnus the Red, doomed when his psychic warning shattered the wards and let the demons flood in. And at the end of that war, the Emperor does something no corpse can do. He thinks. He decides. He seals the broken webway by becoming, once more, a prisoner to the Golden Throne. And he speaks. To his custodian Diocletian, he confesses that his great work is ruined, that the Imperium he is building is ultimately doomed, be it in a year or 10,000, and that, for the first time, he does not know what to do. And the detail that matters most is how that book frames the chair. The Golden Throne in The Master of Mankind is not first and foremost a hospital bed. It is the control interface for the webway, the great human road through the warp that the Emperor was building to free mankind from the immaterium forever. Sitting that chair was how he held the portal open and shielded the new tunnels from the daemons clawing at the walls. The life support function came second, bolted on after Horus, after Magnus shattered the wards, after the great work collapsed. In other words, the most important novel about the throne tells you the chair was a containment and control device first and a coffin second. The healing story is the part the Imperium added later. The machine's original job was to hold something shut. That is not a flat line. That is a conscious being, lucid and despairing, making the worst decision of his existence with full understanding of the cost. So let me be honest with you. The way the cohort rewards honesty and punishes a cheap certainty. The claim of this video is not that the Emperor's mind blinked out like a candle. The claim is narrower and stranger and harder to escape. The claim is that the biological Emperor, the body, the man, is gone, and what the throne now manages is the second thing, the psychic remnant. The question is not whether something is on that chair. The question is whether what's on that chair is a person being kept alive or a presence being kept in. Which brings us back to the lighthouse.
The Astronomicon has to stay lit. That part is not negotiable. If the beacon goes dark, the Imperium does not decline. It shatters overnight. Every fleet blind, every supply line severed. 10,000 worlds cut adrift in the dark to starve. So the light cannot go out. And the official story says the Emperor's living will is what keeps it lit. But consider the other reading. A signal does not require a conscious mind to broadcast. A beacon needs a source, an anchor, a fixed point that does not move. What if the throne's real job is not to keep a man thinking, but to keep his psychic signature pinned in place as a navigational constant? A fixed star for the galaxy to steer by. Not a living watchman in the tower, a dead lighthouse keeper, wired upright, his hand strapped to the lamp, the light shining on long after the man behind it stopped being a man. That reading explains the one thing the official story cannot. Why does the sacrifice never stop? And why does it never heal anything?
10,000 years. 1,000 souls a day, then more, then more. If this were medicine, something would improve. A wound this richly fed would close, or scar, or at least stabilize. Instead, it only deepens. The throne fails a little more each century. The toll climbs to match. That is not the arithmetic of healing. That is the arithmetic of a leak you can only ever slow, never seal. A door you cannot lock. So you spend 1,000 lives a day leaning your weight against it. And the records go quiet exactly where you'd want them to speak. Now, why can't the Imperium simply admit any of this? Because the entire architecture of human civilization is balanced on the opposite claim. Go back to the Lectitio Divinitatis, the book that started the imperial religion. It was written by the Primarch Lorgar before his fall, and its whole thesis was that the Emperor is the one true God of mankind. The Emperor himself denied it, said plainly he was no God, and the believers had an answer ready. Only the truly divine, they said, deny their divinity. You cannot argue with a faith built like that. Every denial becomes proof. And from that seed grew the ecclesiarchy, the adeptus ministorum, the state church of 1,000,000 worlds, recognized as the official religion by the high lords of Terra and never questioned since. Now imagine that institution trying to announce that the god is a corpse. It cannot. Not because the truth is hidden in a vault somewhere, but because the truth is structurally unsayable. 10,000 years of incentive, every cardinal, every high lord, every confessor whose authority flows down from a living, watching God. All of it depends on the emperor being alive. A dead emperor does not just end a man. It ends the legitimacy of everyone who rules in his name. And so the cover-up does not need a conspiracy. It needs only that no one with power has any reason to look, and every reason not to.
And the setting hands you the proof of how total that trap is.
In one of the most quietly damning lines in the whole canon, Guilliman himself, the emperor's own son, returned from the dead and, standing among the high lords, looks at the religion built around his father and thinks, If the emperor stood up off that chair and proclaimed with his own voice that he was not a god, they would condemn him as a heretic for saying it. Sit with that. The most loyal institution in the galaxy would treat the truth, spoken by the emperor's own mouth, as the worst blasphemy it had ever heard. That is the perfect machine for a cover-up. It does not need to suppress the truth. It has built a faith that would reject the truth, even if the corpse on the chair sat up and spoke it. The lie is not guarded by soldiers. It is guarded by belief, which is harder to break than any vault. The audience saw this before I did.
Under that benchmark video, the one that put this whole theory on the map, the video that did nearly 500,000 views on a channel a fraction of that size. A viewer writing as Born Stellar left a comment that took over 1,800 likes. The single most upvoted reading in the whole discussion. The thought was simple and devastating. He can't die because everyone believes he's alive. And another, writing as Phil Allen, left what 1,400 people agreed was the obvious verdict, that this was a stunning theory, the new favorite. The audience is not being sold a fringe idea here. They are recognizing something the official story has been talking around the whole time. Belief, the top comment is saying, is load-bearing. The lie is not just told, it is held up by every human who prays, and, as we'll see, by something far less human than that. Because there is a second congregation nobody counts. The Orcs. Here is canon, not theory.
The Orcs are a psychic species, and their belief bends reality. It is called the Wa, a gestalt field generated by Orc collective conviction, and it grows stronger the more of them gather and agree. If enough Orcs believe a thing, the universe quietly rearranges itself to comply. Red vehicles really do go faster, because the Orcs are certain they should. Ramshackle scrap that has no business firing fires anyway, because 1,000 Orcs expect it to. Their belief is not metaphor. It is a force. It edits the world. Now follow that thread to its end. Across the galaxy, an entire species, numberless, ancient, spread across more worlds than the Imperium can map, holds one belief about the Emperor with absolute, unshakable conviction. They believe he is the greatest warlord who ever lived. They believe he is still out there, still fighting, the one enemy worth the eternal war. To an Orc, the Emperor is not a relic. He is the ultimate scrap, the biggest fight, gloriously, permanently alive. And if Orcish belief can make Red go faster, what does the unbroken faith of an entire warlike species do to a psychic presence they all insist is still alight? It's the cruelest irony the setting can offer. The Imperium spends 1,000 souls a day to sustain their god, and it may be the Emperor's oldest enemies, the green tide that has fought him since before the Imperium was born, who are unknowingly propping up his ghost, keeping the lamp lit with the sheer weight of believing he still holds the line. The Imperium thinks its rituals keep him going. The rituals may be the smaller half of the spell. His enemies are saying the prayer that matters, and they don't even know it's a prayer. And notice how neatly that lands on the throughput problem we started with. One viewer, writing as DJ Zoodude, cut straight to it. The throne keeps him dead makes more sense. 1,000 psykers a day.
That is the whole argument compressed into a sentence. If the Emperor were simply alive, the daily toll would be a maintenance figure. And maintenance figures hold steady. They do not climb across millennia. But a containment figure, the cost of holding a dissolving soul in place against the pull of the warp, against its own coming apart, perhaps even against the strange weight of a galaxy of Orcs insisting he's still in the fight. A containment figure behaves exactly like this one does. It rises. It never closes the wound. It only ever buys another day. The math the audience noticed is the math that breaks the official story, which raises the question that, of all of them, the Imperium is most desperate you never ask. What happens if he wakes? Another comment, 1,500 likes, writing as Spanish Dio, put it perfectly. Once he wakes up, the other chaos gods will pray he stays on that throne.
And the instinct underneath that line is exactly right.
But it points somewhere darker than even the commenter meant, because everyone assumes a returned emperor is salvation. The god emperor risen, the Imperium redeemed, the long night ended. But think about what he would actually be returning to. 10,000 years of atrocity committed in his name, a church that worships him as a god he told them he was not. Inquisitions, purges, whole population spent like coin, all of it signed with his name, all of it justified by his supposed will. A returned emperor is not a savior. He is an audit. He is the founder walking back into the company after 10,000 years to read the books, and the books are written in blood he never authorized. So ask yourself honestly, which faction in the galaxy actually wants that reckoning? Not the ecclesiarchy, whose entire theology he would denounce with his first breath. Not the high lords who have ruled in his absence and would have to answer for it.
Not the Inquisition, whose every purge was signed in his name.
A living, speaking emperor is the single most dangerous entity the Imperium could possibly produce. More dangerous than any chaos god, because the chaos gods only want to end the Imperium, while a returned emperor might want to judge it first. And remember what he is on record as wanting. This is not a god who ever asked to be worshipped. The emperor spent the entire Great Crusade trying to abolish religion, the imperial truth, the secular project, the insistence that there were no gods and no demons, and that mankind must grow up out of superstition. The faith that rules in his name is the precise opposite of the thing he built. Lorgar wrote the first scripture, and the emperor's answer was to humble him for it. So a returned emperor would not walk into a church that had honored his wishes. He would walk into the single largest betrayal of his life's work in the history of the species. 10,000 years of exactly the thing he forbade, carried out under his own face. The audit would not be gentle, and under that logic, the throne stops looking like a tragedy at all. It starts looking like a solution. The most powerful man who ever lived, kept exactly where he can anchor the beacon and never open his mouth. Kept dead, because a dead emperor blesses the Imperium and a living one would damn it. The chair is not the Imperium's greatest grief. It might be its quietest insurance policy. But here's where the canon refuses to print the ending, and where I have to keep my promise to you not to lie. Because there is a real case on the other side, and it is not weak. Steelman it. The Emperor is not silent. He intervenes. Since the Great Rift tore the galaxy in half, living saints walk the battlefields with his power in their hands. The Legion of the Damned manifests where no reinforcements should exist. The Emperor's tarot answers when it is read. And then there is the one event that should settle everything and settles nothing. In Dark Imperium, Guy Haley, 2017. Robute Guilliman, the Emperor's own resurrected son, climbs to the Golden Throne and is granted an audience. Canon tells us the Emperor awoke for the first time in millennia and that his psychic might flowed through his son. And Guilliman comes down from that chamber and will not say what he saw. He refuses, to the end, to describe it. And it is not only Guilliman. The honest version of this argument has to admit that the Emperor's interventions have grown more frequent, not less, in exactly the period when the corpse theory says he should be most thoroughly gone. Since the Great Rift split the galaxy, the saints come faster. The miracles stack up.
If he were truly extinguished, you would expect the signal to fade with the centuries, the way a recording degrades. Instead, the opposite. Whatever is on that chair seems, if anything, to be reaching harder into the world than it did 1,000 years ago. That is the strongest card the believers hold, and I am not going to palm it. There is your living God, a Father who woke for his Son, a power that still reaches into the world to lift up saints and turn battles. How do you square that with a corpse? Here is how, and this is the seam, the place where the whole thing comes apart in either direction depending on how you tilt it. Every single one of those interventions can be reread as containment, not consciousness. A presence that leaks is still a presence.
A signature pinned to a beacon can still bleed power into the warp, and that overflow could light a saint or summon the damned without a single deliberate thought behind it. The way a fault in a reactor throws sparks without intending to. The tarot does not require a mind, it requires a current to read. And Guilliman is the sharpest blade against my own argument, and the sharpest blade for it, both at once. He woke something. But notice what canon withholds. It does not tell us he spoke with his father. It tells us he refused to describe it. The believers hear a son struck silent by awe. But silence is also what you'd carry down from that room if you had climbed all that way to find your father, and found instead the thing that wears him. There is one more piece of the counter case I owe you, because it is the piece that keeps me honest. The perpetual reading.
The Emperor, in much of the lore, was effectively immortal, a being who could not stay dead, who regenerated, who came back from ends that should have been final. If that is true, then the corpse on the chair is not the end of the story but a pause in it, and the throne might be the very thing preventing his natural return. But look closely at where that leads, because it does not rescue the official story. It cuts the other way. If the Emperor is a being who recovers, and 10,000 years on that chair he has not recovered, then the chair is not helping him recover. It is stopping him. A machine that holds an immortal in a state he would otherwise climb out of is not life support by any meaning of the words. It is a cell. The perpetual theory, followed honestly, does not prove he is alive and well. It proves that if he is alive, the throne is what keeps him from waking, which is the containment thesis wearing a hopeful mask. And canon will not tell you which. It was built not to.
The biological emperor, the man, is gone. On that the records do not argue. What remains, the presence the throne holds, is the one thing the setting has guarded as its central mystery for 40 years. Conscious or contained, acting or only leaking, a mind or the shape a mind leaves behind. State the range honestly and you are left exactly where the Imperium fears you'll stand, unable to prove he's alive and unable to prove he's gone, staring at a chair that costs 1,000 lives a day and tells you nothing. So I won't hand you a verdict. The cohort doesn't reward a ruling, it rewards the disquiet, and the disquiet is the honest place to end. But I will leave you with the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is the part that never sleeps. 10,000 years ago, the most powerful being humanity ever produced was placed on a golden chair so that he would never die. Every day since, 1,000 human beings have been fed into that chair to keep the promise. We were told it was mercy.
We were told it was life support.
But you do not spend 1,000 souls a day to keep a man breathing. You spend 1,000 souls a day to keep a door shut. The Emperor isn't being kept alive. He's being kept dead. And the worst part, the part the ecclesiarchy will burn you for saying, is that it's working.